So there's a lot of ways you can approach this. Like you can use hue and saturation is one of the most common ones that I use. If you just start tweaking this, it's gonna really like kind of give you weird colors like that. And then you can play with your saturation too. So what I recommend is first check colorize, because this is going to do two things. It'll desaturate the original image and then tint it with whatever color here. Because notice the hue that I'm picking is actually like what the actual image is looking like. If you don't have colorize, we can go to the blue hue, but the image is turning green. And then if you come over to the green, it's turning everything blue, because it's adjusting the actual pixels that exist already. So since the image is green and you're trying to add blue to it, it starts turning it into like a third different color. So it's kind of tricky sometimes, because here I want like reddish, but it's turning everything blue. So you want to make sure you hit colorize, because that will take the color out of it and then use this as the color value, and just kind of depending how dark the color was is how dark the blue would be or how dark the green would be, but it's not going to be totally different. So maybe we try something kind of like this. Oops, it just moved like way over. So we could try something kind of like that, and then you can grab some more darkness in it if you want it a little bit darker. And then if you want it more intensely colored, you can use this one. So in its most basic form, that's kind of like one step, right? And so now what we can start doing is introducing sources of light. So remember what we did before when we were balancing the image, like we're trying to create something that draws your eye to certain areas. So you treat the whole image as one thing, and then you bring pieces that are more important into the foreground. And so we're going to do the same exact thing now. It's just we're using different tools now. So instead of before where we made everything like really light and then brought the color back, now everything turns kind of bluish. And then we can start bringing some of them back using the mask here. So if you hit X, now so I'm going to use 20% on the white mask and just start drawing black, and I'm going to say there should be a light source here. And so let's actually draw the light source first. So I'm going to make a solid color layer that's white, and I'm going to invert this mask, and then I'm just going to pretend that there's a little light source here for now. So let's say that needs to be a light, so I'm just going to draw white there, and then maybe this guy has a light right here too, and hit delete there. Maybe he has one on his helmet too, so delete. Frank might have one here, delete. And so to make that look believable that those are actually lights, you want some sort of glow coming out of it. So we can go to our effects and you do an outer glow. So here the cool thing is, if you look, not much is happening. So the first step is change this setting, which is the blend mode. So remember when we changed the blend mode on a layer, your effects can have a blend mode that's independent of the layer. Does that make sense? So the layer could be set to normal, but the effect could be set to multiply or overlay or screen in this case. So when it adds an effect, Photoshop is drawing new pixels as the part of the effect. So you can tell it if you wanted it to actually draw that same color, or if it needs to just be affecting the colors behind it. So this is where a lot of people miss this and don't really take full advantage of the effects, and you end up with like really like goofy looking effects because everything is set to normal. So it just looks like you took like crayon and just drew on it, like on top of everything, and it has no interaction. I think she's locked out. And so by adjusting these, it'll give you a totally different look as to what's happening. So then we can adjust that, and you can also adjust like the size of the effect, how far it goes out. So if you look now, like you can see it's really big. So we can pull that back. And see, as we start doing that, you can see that the image is starting to get, so let me zoom in here on these so that we can see this larger. So if you double click, see, it creates the effects here. So if we go back in here, let's go to our outer glow, and then we have this. So opacity is how intense it's going to be, so you can give it more. And then noise would be if you don't want it to be smooth. So let's say like the only time I've ever used noise, this is kind of like the dissolve blend mode. So if you want it to look like sparks or something like that, or if you have like a really low resolution image and when you apply an effect it's like buttery smooth and it doesn't look right, you can add noise so that it kind of makes it look more grainy and believable, but that's not, you don't really need to worry about that too much. So if you want to add noise, you can. And then, so that's how intense that is. And then spread is going to be how far out it goes. And then size is the size. Imagine that as kind of like, so these two will affect basically how far the effect happens. And then the second one is how smooth that gradient effect goes from 100% to 0. And so if you look, this affects the overall size of the effect. And then this one is how smoothly it ends or how smoothly it like feathers itself out. So if you leave this all the way out, it's going to just chop it off like really hard. So if you don't want that, you want it to be more of like a smooth glow, you would do it like that. But let's say you're trying to create like a border, then you might want the hard edge. So that's where it's important to know kind of how to mix and match those settings. I think I have too much noise in there. It's kind of looking weird. So down here, right now, this is where it says quality. That's basically a little graph here that shows you how the fall off of the effect will happen. So the fall off is how it's going to transition from the most intense part of the effect to fading out to 0. So right now it's linear. So notice how it starts fading and then it goes away. And if you click this, you'll see there's a bunch of different little graphs. So these will start making it look differently. So if you click this one, see it starts really intense and then it kind of goes to 0 and then it comes back. And so if you look at our effect, it has like a skip in it. Or you could do the opposite. So for this kind of effect that we're doing, you could get away with just using like one of the first two, depending like which one looks better. But I guess you could do like weird stuff like that. That one's really weird. So you can get away with using just like a smaller one or linear for now, and then we can affect this so it's smoother. Maybe it's not as big, because we're going to also add more effects coming off of this. But now just looking at this, I can tell that's starting to look like there's some lights in our scene, just without doing anything besides drawing little squares. And then also I can come here and say maybe Bender needs some too. So I'm going to draw a little square, and all I have to do is reveal those pixels on this layer, and that effect is already going to apply to it. So I don't need to redo all that. That is set to this layer. So see here, now that I'm clicking on here, maybe there's a light on his bike too. And there you go. So now these are starting to get light sources. Maybe there's another little light hanging from over here. So I'm showing you like without any sort of tricks or anything. It's just we're drawing white and then there's certain things happening around. So we've got that. Now let's start creating. So if you think about this kind of like as a diagram, let me just draw a new layer on top of everything. Oops. So here, let me just switch this and use a hard brush. So I want you to see, oops. How's that doing that? There you go. So where I want your eye to go is something like this. So come up here, come around, and then not fly off the screen like that. My mouse did that, but and then you're coming back this way. So that's kind of the composition I have that I want you to see. And when you look at it, I have this focal point here, and this is going really slow. That's not what I wanted to draw at all. So here, and then the other one is going to be here. And so when you look at that based off like the proportions of the image, that reads pretty nice. And then we have this really hard line. Then we have the trail that guides your eye that way. and then we have Bender, then this tree, and that diagonal is going to bring you here, and then we have Bosworth looking this way, which will help guide your eye that way. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about this, and then we have this kind of piece that's bringing your eye back that way. And so now what we want to make sure is your eye doesn't get lost from that circle. So that might not look like it makes any sense now because I drew all over it, but that's basically what we want to have. So we have one focal point here. Oops. You got that guy, and then here. So and we're trying to bring your eye to these two areas. So we're going to go down the trail. Your eye will get here. It's going to come across, following this line of the tree. And then we have Bosworth here, which is a really big kind of anchor to stop that move. And then you can draw your eye back down this way. And so once you're here, you kind of have this little tree that's going to bring your eye back across. And so then we get in that endless loop here. So that's the kind of things you look in the composition. If we had something like way off up here for no reason, like this weird Dorito looking thing, if we had something out there, your eye might get drawn to it and then just stay there because there's nothing in the composition to bring it back down. So that's the reason I wanted these kind of things, and that's what you look for. And then when we start to make this a night rendering, we're going to try and draw your eye to those and make sure that you keep looking there. So we can turn off our sketch. And then we have created this layer, which is making everything blue, right? So see, as soon as you get rid of that layer, it no longer gives any impact to those little lights because there's no contrast there. So we want to be careful with where we start showing the original image by hiding away this effect. So I'm going to grow this with 20%. I'm going to really lightly start to choose where I think it should be lit up based off what we had there. So then we can come across here, you get there, and so now look at our image up here. It starts really looking like that is the light source it's casting across, and it's just because we had a source and now we're telling the story and we're selling it that actually is lighting it up, when in reality it's not lighting it up, it's just not hiding it. Does that make sense? So we work kind of backwards. And then the trick is you don't want to ever have, so if this is your light source, it should be the brightest closest to the light source, and any object that's farther away would obviously be less bright. So when you're drawing, you want to make sure that like in this zone right here where we had this, so let's delete that one and make a new one. This area right here needs to be like the brightest of anything, and then as we get out from there, like over here, that point should not be as bright as this. Even if they're the same color, you need to have that transition so that it still draws your eye to the light source. So as I start using this effect, I'm going to be really careful to make sure that that value never gets brighter than what's right here. So to do that, when you're revealing using the brush, you start at the brightest point and you draw away from it, and then you let go, and then you move back to the original and you start again. So if I'm using 20% opacity, what will happen is, so let me show you using something that's more obvious. Let's say a solid color. And let's just bring this to the top. So if I invert this and I'm trying to draw red, I can reveal that using 100% opacity. Anywhere I draw, see, I have 100. And once you overlap, you cannot get any more than 100 because it's all the way revealed. Does that make sense? So if I undo that and I use 20% now, if I only click one time, you can only ever get 20% opacity. See, even if I go over the same spot, it can't go over 20 because you've only drawn one time. So that brush stroke can only ever give you 20% opacity. So I see people sometimes going over the same spot like 100 times without letting go of the mouse, and it's not doing anything. That's because you haven't told Photoshop to do anything else besides draw 20%. So see, I can go over it all I want. If I don't let go, it's not going to get any more intense. So now as soon as I let go and click again, see, now it starts to reveal it again because now it's 20%. So anywhere I go now, it will be not 20% opacity that's been revealed, but 40 because it's 20 times 2. And then I let go and I start again, but each time you use a smaller and smaller area. And so now the intensity is here, and then you can do that. And then here you could even, if you really want to increase it, you like double click in that spot. So now if we look at our layer mask, if I hold Alt and go to it, we drew this, which looks kind of like a fish egg or like a UFO or something like that. So, but what that's showing you is that's where it's the most intense. And so that same effect, if we delete this layer now, and we start looking at this one, wherever that's hidden, it's gonna be brighter. So we want to start here and draw away, and then you start again here and you draw away, you start again here and you draw away. And so you're slowly, you're revealing as you go back. And you don't want to start over here and go that way, because now this area could be brighter than that one. So that's the trick. And each time you only go a little bit less away from it. So maybe like right around there, it's really bright. And if you want to make it look super believable, you can switch the colors and go back to black, and now we can hide the back face of this. So right there, or maybe there was like, maybe the light doesn't get back there, but it can get here, and maybe light can't get there. And see, as we start doing this, now that rock starts going like, and it feels like it's like curving towards you now, because it's actually lit up the way it would have been if you had a real light source on it. So all those little tricks are kind of what you use to make this feel really believable. So maybe here no light can get here, and maybe there we hide it behind this rock. Maybe it casts a little shadow over here or something like that. So you can see that as I work, nothing really changes the whole image, but when you combine all these little effects, and this stuff is technically behind him, so maybe some of those aren't very lit up. So now look at our image, and it really does look like there's something glowing from there, and all it is this layer mask. And so those little tricks, like, so let's say you're doing a night rendering with your building. If your building is the light source, as stuff gets revealed, it should start being brighter as you're closer to the building. And that's the key to making it look believable, and not just like you took a picture and then just pasted it in there. It's all these little things that altogether they're not really much. I mean, you're just either hiding it or bringing it back. And so maybe we light that up like that to kind of bring that forward a little bit. So it's up to you to decide kind of how you like to work and which ones you think help tell the story more. Maybe we get some light coming off this guy. Maybe Bender here has lit up the ground there. So at some point you gotta stop and look and make sure it's looking right. So here we're running into an issue where it looks like the tree was opposite, but then there that really helped kind of sell that. So you're kind of like drawing, think of like you're coloring, and then you choose which ones to paint with a little bit of light on them. And when you do it correctly, it just looks right, and it almost looks like there's nothing you could have done. Like, I don't know how well that's reading on that screen, but so here we can do that. And then if you want to start like exaggerating it, so we've done this now, so then you could go on top and add like something that looks like a light beam, and so that doesn't have to do the whole effect, but that's just there to kind of help add to it. So if we grab I'm just going to do a new layer. I'm going to show you again how to do this one trick. So I'm going to say the path should do something like this. And then we go here. I'm just going to fill that with white. Oops. White. So there. So I'm going to undo that because it has a red boundary there. Control delete. So now we've filled that with white. So the first thing I want to do is, obviously light doesn't look like that, like just like perfectly hard edged. So I'm going to use I'm going to save first before I forget. I always remember because I've been in this step before, and I used this blur and then it crashed and I had to do all these steps again, and then it's like almost done, but then I had to restart it. So you go to filter, blur, and then if you want like a really basic blur, you use the Gaussian blur, and this will give you like a consistent kind of blur, which is really good if you're trying to make it look like light was on the ground, and so it's just like lit up on the ground. You don't want that edge. And then the way this works is you choose like how many pixels you want the edge to be blurred, and it will equally blur everything. But see, it looks like he has like the world's strongest light because there's no fall off. It's just like a lightsaber like beaming down on the ground. So rather than use that blur in this case, there's this other blur called the field blur, which is basically like a more customizable version of the Gaussian blur, because if you just have one control point, it will equally blur however many pixels you tell it. So exactly like the Gaussian blur. But you can move these, and then you can also add another one. So then here I can have more blurriness as you get closer to that one, and then I can bring this one again and tell it be less blurry here. And then maybe this one's too strong, so then we can bring that down. So we can get an effect that's kind of like this, and we can move this, and then you can say okay, and so see what that's done. And now remember, this is just set to normal blend mode. It doesn't have any sort of tricks or anything on it. So what we can do is we can change the blend mode, and if you remember back to last class, we said these ones always look at the darker parts of your image. So if our image is just white, none of these blend modes will be valid because it's going to be looking for dark. But then on these ones, these look for the lighter values, which is what we would want here. So if you look, most of these are going to be totally blown out because it's solid white. So then if we go to this one, which starts looking for contrasting things, that's really where the light effects, when you're trying to draw light, these ones usually work the best, because you can see how it starts really taking it from being just like normal, like white, and then actually starting to light up what's behind it. So I'm going to use this one, overlay, and then just bring it way down. So now we kind of have our light with some light sources on there. And then if you wanted to draw it to look like there was actually like a light there, so if we had a light, so we could find a picture of like a bicycle light. That was kind of cool looking. But let's say, how big is that? Kind of like this angle. Well, we can do this effect. I'll show you how to do that. It's not much different than what we already have. So we have this one, copy. And now we need to drop this back down here where we have all our stuff so that it gets colored. And I don't really care about the rest of this image. I only want the light. So I'm going to just quickly grab something like this. And this is one of those cases where you don't need to be perfect with the selection. You can see how big the image is when I brought it in. And then think about how big it's going to be when I scale it down to be the right size. So even if you were like the worst at using the lasso tool, it's not going to matter, because we're going to just delete that, paste it now. Once you scale it down, you'll never be able to tell that it's jagged, because it needs to be like this big. So now we can move that however you want. You can put one here, we can put one up here. Oops. We can transform that so that it's actually pointing that way. We can give these guys lights. And see, these ones you can't even tell like what's going on because they're so tiny. Maybe he has one there, maybe Bender has one. And for that light source, maybe we'll put like a lantern or something on there. So now we've drawn these. So what we can do now, let's say we don't want that glow to be so like warm and you want it to look more like neon, or maybe they have like different colors. So how could you do that? Like you could overlay like a whole new color and all that, but since we did this as a layer effect, it remains live. So this is a really easy way. Let's say like for whatever reason a design that you did, you wanted color changing lights to show how it's going to change the whole feel of the space. If you use an effect like this, you can always change this color like on the fly. And see now like all of our lighting turned really cold, or you can make it like purple, like, so you can always get these kind of crazy looks by doing that. The rest of our image is warm though, so it works nice the way we have it. So I got that guy, and then if you look, like our light source is in technically the wrong spot now. So oops, I gotta go here, delete. I can delete there, and now I can zoom in. Whoa. Let's try and deselect it, not get that close. So now I can grab just like in here and make that the light source. So see, before we were just using kind of like a random shape. Now I have something there. Same with these guys. We can delete these. And then when you bring them back, it really sells the fact that there's a light there now. So those are small enough. So, and if they're not big enough, you can always exaggerate them. Just make it a little bit bigger of a source. So that's looking really good. Now over here we need to sell this a little bit better because it doesn't really look as nice as this side. Although this one did have, we had the advantage of all those rocks and faces that we can use to kind of make it look more believable. But here we have, this one can be really cool because we have the water, so we could get away with doing reflections. So that's the fun thing to do at night. You can get a lot of really cool looking reflections in the water, or you can just say like the ground is shiny and then it's wet or something, and then you just get all these really cool reflections to help. They really help with your composition. So let's say we want to do that. We can go ahead and grab, we could actually grab like the entire image. But before we get too far, I want to make this look believable. So let's grab, where's my nighttime layer? Is it this one? This one. Okay. So brush here. So hiding it makes it blue. So maybe here we bring this one up. So that is the color of it. Wait. On the wrong one again. This is the one. So there, yeah, that's working. Maybe back there it's not as bright. Maybe you pick and choose, maybe something like that. So as you start doing this, it's really, that's all we're doing, is we're creating just different masks that help kind of sell the fact that this is all going on. And then maybe in real life that tree would be blocking the reflection, but who cares? We can do something like this, which is always cool. I don't think you would see the shack, but if you make a selection and you go to edit and you do copy merged, that will copy everything that's there, even if they're on different layers, and put them together into one. So you can do copy merged, and then if you paste, say we'll make a new layer, and this layer, oh no, put it into the nighttime. So this layer is, let me just only show you that layer. It's just whatever it had there. And so what I'm going to do with that layer, because it's going to get confusing right now if you don't know what I did, I'm going to flip it upside down, and then I'm going to move this so it starts kind of getting something in there. And then I'm going to mask. And then I'm going to totally hide the edges. So I don't even need to have a small brush. I'm going to use a 100% brush with black and just get rid of all that. I don't want any of this. Don't want that edge. And then here, really all I need to do is make sure I get this nice and sharp there. Something coming across here. And so see, now we have him down there in the water. But what if I want this to look like, oh yeah, maybe the tree should be here, that would work. So if we want to make that believable, that that's actually a reflection, so we can play around with looking at this. So maybe we say, okay, there's a rock there, but who cares? You can also like uncheck the mask so they're not linked, and now we can position him a little bit differently. So we've got that there. Now what I usually do on these layers is I'll go to the Smudge Tool. Have you guys used this one before? So the way you adjust this tool, there's two main settings. You have like your brush that you're using, and so like a typical brush, it has size that you can control, and then also like the shape. And then there's this, which is really important, which is strength. So the higher you set the strength, the bigger impact it has on the image as you're trying to smudge it. The lower you make the strength, the less it's going to shift on you. So I always do, whenever I'm trying to do like reflections, I do two steps. The first one is to give it like a really soft wavy effect all the way down, and then I go back and do all the little ripples. And if you do it that way, it looks really believable. If you only do one, it doesn't look right at all. But when you combine both, it's really fast and it's really easy. The first step is you turn down the strength, and then we make the brush really big. And make sure you're actually changing the layer, not the mask, because I've done that before. And then we're using smudge, and so I'm going to click on here and just pull it to the right a little bit, and then maybe pull the tree to the left a little bit. And so you're just trying to kind of blur it a little, just so it's not so perfect. Maybe we push it that way again. Maybe you go like that. And so see how now it's kind of shifted it a little bit and it's no longer straight. Now you crank the strength way up to like in like the 70s or 60s, but you make your brush super tiny, like that size. And then all you have to do is just draw back and forth. So you click, drag across, and you let go, and you click, drag across, and you let go. And this, you'll see, is way stronger. So it's going to start cutting into your image. And if you only go back and forth, it ends up looking a little weird. But so I'm just going to keep cutting it like in two different directions. So you can get away with something like that. Sometimes you want to keep going in one direction versus the other one. So here we can do it on the tree. So something like that's kind of cool, where we can keep pushing that side in. So now we're starting to smudge it so that it looks kind of like that. And then you can play with the opacity of it. So we start getting some of those reflections in there. And then if the intensity is not enough, we can start to now say, you know what, that should have been brighter now, right? Because our image is down there. Oh, it's not even behind there. That's the problem. So this should live down here with all the other images. There we go. So now we can say we need to brighten that up. So we go to where we had, oh, but it might not work that way. So we'll see. So that's the one that's making it look like nighttime. And then we reveal it here with 20. You hide it. So we're trying to bring, is this not the right one? Ah, that's what's going on. I thought I hit brush, but it didn't switch to it. So 20. So now we hide it like this. Yep, so there we go. So thanks for catching that. So then here, maybe that's actually lighting up some of the stuff. And if that becomes too intense, you can always turn it down. And the cool thing is we can use this mask and we can lighten this a little bit so we can see where those rocks were. And obviously a rock wouldn't reflect everything the way water would. So you can come in here and hide the reflection behind this. So it doesn't show up there, maybe it doesn't show up around this rock. Maybe here it doesn't show. Is there any other rocks here? And now when we bring this back, so you can get as much or as little as you want. So that looks kind of weird there. So now we start really getting it to be more believable. And you can either turn that intensity up or down. And then we can go here and kill a little bit of it. So that we have that. So all these little things are what start to make it look really like it's either real or not. So maybe this tree should be lit up. So it's going to be mostly lit from the bottom, but then maybe as it goes up, that side that faces the other side will get more revealed. So then you have that. Maybe that tree back there gets some. And then back here at his shack, we have this little guy that should be causing some stuff to get more lit up. So maybe his shack is really prominent and visible there. But obviously out there it wouldn't be. Maybe as it comes out. And here a cool thing you could do is rather than using just a normal brush to hide these, if we switch our brush tip to look like the leaf, and then we hide using the leaf. So I still have black selected, and then I can go up to like 100 opacity. Oops. Switch it like this. And as you start to hide this, some of these may look like you have some definition to it. So it's all in the edges. So how do you get the edge to look? Should the edge be smooth? Should it have a hard edge? Should it be like diffused like this as if it was plants? And then up here obviously you wouldn't see anything, so we can switch back to our normal brush. And then that should be really dark up here. Maybe, oops, maybe the side of that. And And don't get too sucked in with zooming in, because you may not even notice it later. So try and pick and choose which ones you want to hit. Not really strong here there. So we've got that going like that. So that looks pretty good. And then what else shall we do? So if it needs even more, you can use an effect like this one that we had before. Where is that guy at? Is it this one? That brightness and contrast, we can bring him out and drop him on top, and then start using this to really hit the areas only where you're getting so let me delete this mask, create a new one, and then this guy we can put the highlights only where they would really be lit up bright. So maybe with like 70 we bring this in. So maybe that rock face there, maybe like here, maybe right there. And notice I'm not trying to get it like perfect or anything, I'm just throwing light on some stuff. Maybe that edge of that tree should be brighter. So that really brought this guy forward. He was like hard to see before. Look at that face of this tree. And so as you start playing around with these, you start getting more or less. And we can always then go back and double check to see, was the setting we chose the right one? Like, do we need to do lighter or darker for the rest of the image? Do you need less saturation in the rest of it or more? So I don't think this is the right one. Oops. No idea what I was changing there. I meant to change this one. So here, like, do we want it to be lighter, darker? More saturated, less saturated. So now you can go back and kind of fine tune the colors the way you like it and get everything to look just the way it needs to. So that's the trick. When you see those images, you're like, man, they got it so perfect. How they do it? It's not, they didn't just get it right the first time. They did it like this, where you can adjust it and get it perfectly set up the way you need to. So we've got that. Oh, so that's if you drop the curves on top. Kind of liked it better this way. It's a little bit less intense. Still feel like this guy's too strong. You guys have any questions on this part? Does that make sense? So for now, the building's really kind of, it's there, but it should just feel like it's part of the scene and not too like distracting. Because ultimately, a rendering should feel like you're in the space. It shouldn't feel like you're looking at your building like that rendering on that project there where the building is just in the middle of nowhere. So that doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what it would feel like to be there. These ones do a little bit better job. But here you could feel like if the whole idea was to sell him on this place, that like, look, you could be right there. It's not really about the building at that point. It's about that the building is at the edge of this experience and you can be there. And so then once you see that, you could say, okay, yeah, that I could believe it. I'm there. And so a lot of times we do renderings and you think, oh man, I just need to show my building in this way or that way, but the rendering can have a greater purpose than just serving as a tool to view your building. Like you can just always export a bunch of views out of your model, like axonometric views or aerial views or just a bunch of cameras around your building, and you'll see what the building looks like. But if you want to feel what it's like to be there, that's a totally different exercise. And the building at that point is only part of the story. It's not the whole story. So that's one thing that if you take only one thing away from this exercise, it's that. And then moving forward from this assignment, we're going to be modifying these so that that shack is no longer just a shack, but now it becomes a building that you design, and yet you'll render. And you're basically, the first step will be to swap out that building for the rendered version that you render, and then you'll start doing different views of that model. But it's always going to be kind of in this place, so it doesn't need to be necessarily the same exact view, but the rest of the semester you'll be kind of building the rest of the story, really. So it's going to keep getting more and more fun, I guess. So I think here this looks pretty good. Sometimes you can add stuff on the very top. Let's say, like, I don't know, you can always play with these guys. You can add another set of curves to make sure like your image is all the way, if you want. So see, like, just because you've added all the elements doesn't mean you have to stop at any like one point. Like, you can really blend them, and if that becomes too saturated, then you cut it back a little bit. Or you can use these, and then you can now go back to the other one and start toning those down or up, depending on what you see happening in the final one. So here I see, when I look there, I get kind of lost here on Bender, so I want to turn that one down some. So here it's too much there, so let's bring this down. Because it's kind of really bright here, whereas it should be more bright on the ground, like that. See, now it looks believable. It looks like the light cast down on the ground's shining up at you. And if you wanted it to look like grass blades here, I know it's kind of blurry, but if you hide that effect with the grass leaf, instead of the maple leaf you have grass, and then we switch this to black so that it hides it, and 0, and then we start to draw little grass blades here. It's kind of hard to see. I think what's happening, yeah, so see, some of the brushes, when you draw, they actually draw multiple colors, and so when you're trying to do the mask trick, it doesn't really work very well because it starts showing it and hiding in certain areas. So I'm going to undo a bunch of those, and I'll show you how to change that, because this tool is really strong if you can get that setting turned off, and it's under the brush settings. So if you go to Window, Brush, Settings, and then it's called Color Dynamics. So this will allow it to change between foreground and background. So if you just turn that off, now it will only draw like one color, whichever your foreground color is. So now when we go back, you'll see this will work a lot nicer, because it's gonna, oops, I need to show it. See, there you go. So see, so you could pick and choose kind of like some areas where you want grass, so that it looks like it's not just solid. And the reason it looks so weird is because I'm using, wow, I don't know how I just did that. It's too much intensity. It's at 100. So it's only use like 50. Maybe over here you get some grass effect. So if we're happy with that now, we can say, okay, so maybe, oh, and you can also rotate using that setting. So here we have the brush settings. If you go to the shape, this circle thing will rotate. So see, right now all my grass is going up. If I rotate this, now the grass can go in different directions. So here you can blur away that little edge a little bit and then get rid of that. So I don't know whether you like that or not, but you can always keep going. So here maybe that needs to be dark. There. So we've got that looking pretty good to where I like it. Maybe here it could use a little bit more brightness. And maybe we make his little window up here on. So he has like a little window here. Maybe we get just that face. So what I'm doing here is different than what I was doing before. I made a selection, so we'll only draw here. And then think about where the light should be coming from. It should be coming from here. And maybe you give it just one little click out to give it that little effect. There. So if you like that and you're ready to go, then we're done. Save it. And so last time we talked